Before we get into the deep dive, I have something I would like to tell you about, something that I was pleasantly surprised by, honestly, and that is Midas Merge. Thank you to Midas Merge for sponsoring this video. So a couple weeks ago, I was presented with the opportunity to work with Midas Merge, so I was like, all right, hold up, I need to play the game first. All right, I sat down, downloaded the game, expected to play it for like 10-15 minutes, see how it is, because I'm very picky about my mobile games. I played it for almost 3 hours. Needless to say, I got hooked. And for those of you who don't know, Midas Merge is a mobile game where you can discover and nurture the cutest little creatures. You can hatch and evolve them by merging items, and my personal favorite is the Cappy Bird, which transforms from an adorable little baby into a level 3 creature. And in Midas Merge, you team up with King Midas and Queen Leah, which are under the shadow of Nyx, the goddess of night. So unravel Nyx's mystery as you merge sunbursts to brighten the garden and free its adorable inhabitants. And for December, Midas Merge will feature the Winter Gardens, full of magic and holidays and everything cheerful. So from December 5th to December 29th, players can earn a delightful seasonal creature like the adorable winter reindeer and the super rare polar bear. So don't miss out on the fun and download Midas Merge now. And be among the first 100 people to use my link down below or the QR code that you can scan to gain a personalized winter creature, which is reindeer level 1 with my name. Thank you to Midas Merge for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to the deep dive. Thank you again to Midas Merge for sponsoring this video. Discover your next favorite game, merge, restore, and heal the Golden Garden. Download Midas Merge for free via this link or by scanning the QR code. So let's start with who is JonBenet. JonBenet was born on August 6th, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia. And her parents are Patricia, otherwise known as Patsy, and JonBenet Ramsey. They were a wealthy family, with Patsy being a former beauty queen crowned Miss West Virginia in 1977. And John was a very successful businessman. He was the president of Access Graphics, a computer service company. But despite the demands of his work, however, he was a loving father who cherished his children. And JonBenet had a very vibrant personality from a very young age and loved performance. And given her mother's background in the pageantry scene, it's unsurprising that JonBenet would enter the world of child beauty pageants, dominating the scene in Colorado when her family relocated. And Patsy had a very firm hand on JonBenet's pageantry, driving participation and deeply involving herself in all aspects of her performances. Patsy would design costumes and choreograph her routines as well. So she would basically coach and train her daughter for these pageants. And JonBenet had a knack for pageantry. She was very outgoing and confident, possessing many characteristics that helped her excel at these shows. And Patsy would just nurture these traits in JonBenet. And by the age of 6, JonBenet had earned several notable titles in the child beauty pageant circuits. She was Little Miss Colorado, Little Miss Cher Laveau, Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, America's Royal Miss, and National Tiny Miss Beauty. And I won't go too much into my opinion of child pageants, but I myself don't love the idea of a little child being dressed up like a woman, a provocative woman. I don't think it invites the right people inside, and I think it makes kids grow up faster than they're supposed to, but that is just my opinion, and that's all I'm gonna say about that, and that is that. But John and Patsy had their daughter, who was excelling in her passion, and they also had a son named Burke, the quieter sibling between the two. And Burke was more reserved than JonBenet, despite being 3 years older. He didn't have aspirations of fame or glamour at all. And Burke and JonBenet supposedly enjoyed a typical sibling relationship with the usual sibling conflicts, quarrels, and shared activities. And Burke may have been the sibling that JonBenet was closest in age with, but Burke was not the only other child in the house. JonBenet and Burke had 2 half-siblings, and these siblings were from their father's first marriage. Melinda and John Andrew were a bit older than Burke and JonBenet. John Andrew being born in 1976, he was 14 years older than JonBenet and 11 years older than Burke. And Melinda was born in 1972 and was about 18 years older than JonBenet and 15 years older than Burke. And they they also had another half-sibling named Elizabeth Ramsey, who was the first child of John's marriage, though she sadly passed away from a car accident in 1992, 4 years before the death of JonBenet. But from the outside, the Ramseys were the picture-perfect family with everything going for them. They had many beautiful children, one becoming an unprecedented rise to fame and success, and many beautiful memories being made. Sorry, I gotta put my glasses on. I can't read. And they lived in a beautiful home due to John's successes with his business. And their home had 3 levels, with the 3rd floor belonging to John and Patsy. They had 2 bathrooms on their floor, a sizable closet, their dressing room, and a personal fireplace in their massive bedroom. And all the children lived on the 2nd floor of the family home, with the daughters on one side of the floor and the sons on the other, with the children's playroom separating the 2 halves. And from all appearances, the Ramsey family seemed pretty wealthy. Though in a recent interview, JonBenet argued against his family's portrayal in the media as rich. He says they didn't consider themselves rich despite his business selling and seeing more money than he'd ever thought he'd ever have because he just kept working. So I guess he didn't think he was rich because he kept working, and he also had more money than he ever thought he'd had, which I get that to a certain degree. You know, if you're still working, does that really mean that you're rich? I don't know. Like, what else are you supposed to do, I guess? I don't know. But he and his family were portrayed as rich because his company reported $1 billion in gross revenue.
But we were portrayed as I was president of a company that had done $1 billion in revenue. We were a distributor, like a grocery store. You got to sell a lot of milk and eggs to make a little bit of money. And that was the kind of business we're in. So in our industry, that was not a huge business.
And John was even named Entrepreneur of the Year in 1995 by Boulder, Colorado Chamber of Commerce. So I'd say you're pretty rich and successful. But I think they just didn't like being portrayed as this like rich, pompous family who didn't like their children. Like, this is, you know, backing onto like Menendez brothers, like rich type family. They're just portrayed poorly among the press and among the public. But this picture perfect life would come crashing down on one night of the year that was supposed to be filled with the most cheer. It was Christmas Day, 1996, and all seemed well. JonBenet and her older brother Burke spent part of the day opening presents. And later in the evening, the family planned to attend a Christmas party hosted by their friends Fleet and Priscilla White. And it would be late when the family returned and put their children to bed. So it is important to note that John Ramsey was the one to put JonBenet to bed that night. And the following morning at 5:30 a.m., Patsy would wake up and start her day, and she would head downstairs. But before she made it halfway down, she encountered 3 pieces of paper lying on the stairs. And upon reading it, her heart would drop. It was a ransom note for $118,000 for her daughter, JonBenet Ramsey. And she would quickly rush upstairs to her daughter's room only to find her missing from her bed. And at 5:52 a.m., JonBenet Ramsey was reported missing to authorities, and the hunt began. And I think it's important to read this ransom note if you haven't heard it. I'm sure a lot of you have, but I think it's very relevant because from what it says and how everything else went down, it's very strange. It's very strange to say the least. So I am going to read the ransom note for you to pick apart yourself, and for me to also pick apart throughout the rest of this video. Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We do respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure you bring an adequate size attache to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery on the money and hence a earlier delivery pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The 2 gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as the police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with the law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory. CBTC. Yeah. So the note is, and I won't get into it too much now, but very long. Very long and very, very well written. Whoever wrote this is very well read, but there are a couple spelling mistakes here and there. And I personally noticed some odd things throughout as well that I haven't actually necessarily seen other people talk about, which I will talk about as well as we get into it. But do with that what you will with the note, and we will get into the rest of the video. So when investigators arrived at the Ramsey residence, because Patsy did call the police after reading this, they immediately began to ask questions and investigate the note. The first details noticed is that it was all handwritten using Patsy's notepad and Sharpie from within the home. And I personally can't imagine having a killer in your home sitting on your furniture while you're sleeping, writing a note before coming upstairs to take your child. It sounds like a nightmare. And it sounds very odd. In total, FBI investigators estimated that the person would have spent 21 minutes inside the home writing, which seemed really implausible, because if they were after JonBenet, they would have most likely been in and out as not to get caught. And the note stated not to call the police or JonBenet would be hurt, but Patsy called anyway. And later that morning, 2 police officers arrived at the residence to investigate the home. And upon arrival, the police officers determined that there was zero evidence to suggest that there was any forced entry. There were no footprints in the snow outside, unidentified fingerprints, or tool marks near the doors or windows. Meaning the person either had access to the home or was from the home, or perhaps the Ramsey family just never locked their doors. And one of the officers actually tried to get in the basement, but found that the door to the basement was locked from the inside, not allowing them to investigate at the moment. And after finding no initial evidence, investigators were called in. And at 8 a.m., investigator Linda Arndt arrived at the home and began to work. And the first thing that she noted was that the parents, Patsy and John, were not standing near each other and purposely avoiding each other, which she found extremely odd for grieving parents. And Fleet and Priscilla had come over after Patsy had called them and helped search the home. The civilians helped search the home. What's going on? I know it's a different time, but it was, we're getting into the late 90s at this point. We know how to do searches. It's very strange. And at about 10 a.m., Fleet made it into the basement and discovered that the lights were already on and that the door to the wine cellar was already open. He looked around some more and found a broken window that was open that John claimed he had broke months ago but just neglected to fix. And many speculated that this is where the assailants might have entered and exited into the home, avoiding any evidence of forced entry upstairs. However, the grime and cobwebs on the windowsill showed that nobody had come through there recently, which I think is very important. And very obvious. Plus, there were no footprints exiting or entering near the window from the outside. But still, people were convinced because directly underneath the window was a suitcase that had scuff marks along the top, which, to be fair, could have come from anything at any point of the life of that suitcase. And some people believe that whoever killed JonBenet stepped down onto the suitcase and entered the home that way. Also, all around the basement were footprints found with the mold of a men's high-tech brand boot, and John Ramsey didn't own a pair of these shoes, and to this day, many believe this belonged to the murderer. And investigators also learned that neighbors claimed that they saw lots of activity in the Ramsey household past midnight. And one neighbor, Melody Ann Staton, claimed to have heard JonBenet Ramsey screaming for her life. She said, quote unquote, "I heard a terrible sound. It was the longest, most horrible scream I have heard in my entire life. It sent shivers down my spine. I could tell the sound was coming from the Ramsey house, and I knew instantly it had to be their little girl. But then I realized John and Patsy were home, so whatever it was, that caused their little girl to scream, they were there to take care of it. And another neighbor, Scott Gibbons, claimed to see dim lights flashing around in the Ramsey kitchen from his kitchen window. But what's interesting about that is if the neighbors were to hear a scream that loud, it's weird that nobody in the house heard that scream, because from what we know, they didn't hear it, and that they woke up to JonBenet being completely gone. So that's also something I find very odd. And continuing their search, investigators still found no evidence and no JonBenet. So they asked again for John Ramsey and some other family friends who had come over to the home to search the house to see if they could find any information, which is horrible police work, to have the public just coming in and looking for evidence. I don't even understand how this was a thing. And at about 1 p.m., John Ramsey would enter, make his way down, and make his way to the open wine cellar. And to his horror, there lay the deceased body of his 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet. And her body would be covered with a blanket, and her mouth was covered with duct tape. And her hands were tied to her neck by some nylon cord. And other odd evidence included the fact that JonBenet was found next to a hidden floor safe that was covered in dust with a top plate, but it was partially ajar as if someone tried to open it. And after finding his daughter deceased, John Ramsey would pick her up from the crime scene and walk her upstairs, completely ruining any evidence that was at the crime scene, or tampering with it at the least. But, I mean, to play devil's advocate, I mean, you're a father and you find your daughter deceased, and I think the last thing you're thinking about is how to preserve evidence. So I will give him that. And I think in an interview he did mention that he thought he could still maybe save her. So I know a lot of people scrutinize that, and it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And the initial autopsy report found that the cause of death was asphyxiation by strangulation associated with cranial trauma, as if she got hit on the head with something. And a garrote made of nylon cord and a paintbrush handle was used for the strangulation. And the paintbrush handle used in the garrote wire came from Patsy's art supplies. But the bottom third of the brush was never found. And inside JonBenet's stomach was a partially digested pineapple, which meant she had clearly eaten a few hours before her death. And in the kitchen, a bowl containing pieces of pineapple was found with Patsy's fingerprints on it. Yet neither Patsy or John remembered giving JonBenet any food after they arrived home. So a massive list of suspects was constructed, reaching over 1,600 people. And Patsy and John were obviously the first two suspects due to the evidence found in their home and because of their odd behavior. However, DNA evidence quickly ruled them out at the time. But this didn't convince everyone, because during the investigation, there were numerous mistakes and broken protocols that made the case even harder to solve. Pieces of evidence were lost, like when the family friends started to use spray cleaner on the kitchen counters, or when they sealed off JonBenet's bedroom, leaving the rest of the home completely open for family and friends, even though JonBenet was found in the basement and was numerous pieces of evidence found throughout the home. It's just like insane to me that this happened. And the evidence that did survive was mislabeled, and during the investigation, confidential evidence was shared with the Ramsey family and friends present at the home, and overall, there was just a poor investigation of the home by police and detectives. And because of this, two parties formed. One was the DA's office and Detective Lou Smith, who believed that the evidence found alluded to an outside party being responsible for JonBenet's death. And the other party was Boulder, Colorado Police Department, which believed that the Ramseys were responsible. And this led the Colorado governor to initiate a grand jury to decide whether or not the Ramseys should go to court for the death of their daughter. And on September 15th, 1998, the grand jury met and in early 1999 created a charge against the Ramseys for child endangerment resulting in death, where both parents knowingly or recklessly put JonBenet Ramsey in a dangerous situation that led to her death, and obstruction of justice, where both parents helped someone avoid being caught or punished for crimes including murder and child abuse resulting in death. However, the family would not be prosecuted because the district attorney believed that there was no way to prove that the Ramseys' guilt with 100% certainty. And since then, there has been no major evidence found, and no suspects have ever been brought into custody. And even even with the advances in DNA and forensic technology, the old samples collected from the crime scene remained unidentified. And to this day, the two camps still exist, but prosecutors are leaning more towards the Ramsey family being guilty. And in recent years, investigators have criticized the first detectives and officers who worked on the case for exonerating the Ramseys so early on, believing it damaged the integrity of the case for future investigators. And the case is still open as the Boulder police search to find the killer of JonBenet Ramsey. So let's go through some of the theories and suspects. The first one is that the parents did it. Allegedly. This isn't me. This is me just talking about other people's theories. So the 911 call on December 26 had Patsy Ramsey calling the police saying that her daughter had been kidnapped and stating that she was 6 years old and sounding very frantic on the phone. And she stated that her daughter had been missing and that she had a ransom note that was left signed by SBTC Victory.
911 emergency. Police. What's going on? 515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am?
We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please.
Explain to me what's going on, okay?
There's a note left and our daughter's gone.
A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter?
6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old.
How long ago was this?
I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's
Does it say who took her?
What?
Does it say who took her?
I don't know. There's a ransom note here.
It's a ransom note?
It says SBTC Victory.
And after the investigation opened to the kidnapping, the 911 operator felt that the call seemed rehearsed. And investigators also broke down the call, stating her word choice and deliberate speech also sound rehearsed. And when she explained that there was a kidnapping, she said, "We have a kidnapping," which is just a very odd phrase to use when your daughter's been kidnapped. And the phone call was also enhanced in different ways, and with the end of the phone call, after she put the phone down, hearing, "How could you do that?"
Patsy? Patsy?
And although this evidence is inconclusive and could be labeled as a pure assumption, I've listened to it, and it's kind of hard because after you know what somebody thinks that they said, that's kind of all you hear. But we really don't know. That is also just like a blatant like theory that's the people think, but I'm not claiming that that is what she said. And the evidence at the scene of the crime of JonBenet's murder led to the investigation of the ransom note. And this would lead to Patsy and John Ramsey becoming suspects in the crime. The random note being handwritten and unusually lengthy, according to investigators. And to make matters worse, the paper for the note was taken from Patsy's own notepad, and her own Sharpie was used as well, as we discussed earlier. And this led the forensic team to believing that the note was written inside the residence, which would be an unnecessary risk for an intruder to feel inclined to do so. And experts like retired FBI Supervisor Special Agent Jim Clement and other experts estimated the note would have taken around 21 minutes to write. That's a really long time. That is just shy of half an hour of sitting in the house writing this note when you're about to commit an insane crime that could put you in jail forever, basically. But again, it just paints the narrative of an intruder unlikely as to not wasting time to put themselves into danger of being found. And they also noted that the ransom note had unique and specific words misspelled, such as possession and business. And according to forensic linguistics expert James Fitzgerald, the spelling could have been deliberate or a cover to hide the actual suspect's identity. Because John and Patsy Ramsey were all very well educated, attending so-called big state schools. Those schools being Michigan State and West Virginia University, which showed they wouldn't misspell such simple words. However, with investigators supposing that these words were deliberately misspelled, suspicion pointed back on the two, doing this to hide behind their education. And Fitzgerald would also notice another detail with the handwriting, stating that the font style printing had generally a feminine trait, drawing similarities to Patsy's own personal handwriting, including font style and printing as well. I have combed through these letters. The amount I've looked at this, like I am a freaking forensic linguistic expert, which I'm not at all, but I feel like I want to look at it with you guys, and I just want to make some notes that I found, that some of them have been obviously caught by experts. But some of them, I don't know why, but I couldn't find the certain thing that I personally noticed, but I thought, you know, is kind of relevant. We look at the actual ransom note, and like what they're saying, it has, you know, the kind of deliberate looking squiggles in it. At the beginning, it kind of gets better throughout the end, as if almost whoever's writing it kind of gave up on trying to mask what it was, to be honest. But one thing I noticed, like they say that the E's look really similar to Patsy and the perpetrator who wrote this ransom note, and other letters as well. But I found that the A's were very interesting, because throughout the ransom note, you see the perpetrator doing these types of A's a lot. Like in the beginning, we see it here and here and here, and you kind of just see them throughout. You see the A change, like right here, into just, you know, your regular A. And I noticed that whoever wrote this kind of stops at one point and goes back to the regular A and then switches to the other A, which is odd. It's not a very common thing to do. So I found that while I was looking at the ransom note, and I was like, well, whoever wrote this really likes to use both A's. And if you're just listening and can't see what I'm showing right now, I'm talking about more of a cursive A, and then just your regular A that looks like an O with a little tail off of it. And then I looked at, Mrs. Ramsey's writing, and by God, I found the same similarity, which I found very interesting. We see here that she's using the second A, mostly, especially at the beginning. She doesn't screw up there, but then we get to the second paragraph, and we see the first A right here changed to the other A, which is very odd. I just found that very odd. And then she switches back to the other A, and then she goes back to the other A, like in bank here. I mean, I'm sure that there's been lots of forensic people that have already picked up on that, because I'm just a mere person who looked at it for like an hour. But it's just a very interesting similarity, and maybe it has nothing to do with anything, and I'm just a stupid YouTuber, and what do I know? Probably nothing. And then they also got her to do individual words that were on the ransom note, which was interesting. And you see that she doesn't stray from using the same A. She uses the same A throughout all of them. And then also in her just random other letter that they took, she does the same thing where she's using two different A's. And I just find that so weird. Anyway, that's my little A. I'm just Canadian. I just like saying A. But that's my little A theory. That's just strange. Just a little bit strange, you know? But anyway, the suspicions were adding up, and not only was the note written from inside the house, and the handwriting was strikingly similar to Patsy's, but the actual tone of the words were very interesting, because it apparently had less emotion than conventional anonymous threats, since it lacked any adjectives or emphasis on words that would need to be there to threaten or strike fear into the reader. Like, why wouldn't a kidnapper threaten the victim's family in order to cause them to comply better? And it's pointed yet again at the Ramseys, because was there actually a real threat? And if there wasn't, then it makes sense that this note was written kind of like, so like, laissez-faire, you know? Because if they already knew that their daughter wasn't actually kidnapped and wasn't actually going to get killed because she was actually already murdered, why would they put emphasis into like emotional tones in the ransom note? But this is, again, all alleged. I'm not saying anything, but it's just a note. So with the lack of emotional tone, the note taking too long to be written by a rushed intruder, written on the same notebook and Sharpie from inside the house, and the handwriting also being suspicious, the conclusion that the parents staged a false note is more than likely. However, it is not confirmed. And all of this pretty much eliminated John from being a suspect of writing the ransom note. But Patsy was not, and her handwriting was compared to the note, where police asked for a sample of her writing the note herself to compare to, which we saw earlier when I went on my little A rant. And the investigators and police would later question Patsy for 6.5 hours, with her husband John only being interviewed for 2. And the transcript for their talk is insanely long, but I read it. I did read it, and a lot of it just goes over like who they are, what the where they came from. They literally just went through their whole history, who they knew, how they were connected, going through everything. But her story kind of had a lot of weird details, and it sounded like lots of lawyer-directed responses, such as glossing over the details that the note came from Patsy's own notepad. But again, nothing ever came of that, and she died an innocent woman, so it is what it is. And that is, you're innocent until proven guilty. That brings us to the brother theory. One of the crazier whodunit theories to come out of JonBenet Ramsey's murder investigation speculates that her brother, Burke, was the one who killed her, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Again, this is a theory, but much of this stems from speculation that the two may have had an unfortunate interaction over the midnight pineapple snack. So the theory suggests that Burke was having a midnight snack and JonBenet took a piece, which made Burke upset, resulting in him hitting her over the head with a flashlight, a blow that would kill her. And it's strictly speculative, and that was never a proven fact. I just want to make that very, very clear. But when this theory began to emerge, however, it caused people to scrutinize Burke and his past, looking for any indication that he had a history of behavior that could be used to prove that something was off about Burke and that he was capable of murder, or was at very least mentally ill or disturbed. And this theory reached a fever pitch in 2016 with the release of CBC documentary, The Case of JonBenet Ramsey. And in this documentary, a heavy emphasis is placed on Burke being the culprit, and former FBI Special Agent Jim Clement claimed in the documentary that Burke had a history of scatological problems, meaning that he had an interest in excrement. And one example is that he had allegedly smeared feces on JonBenet's Christmas presents as well as bedroom and bathroom walls. And if that were true, that would seemingly indicate a history of disturbing acts perpetrated by Burke targeting his younger sister. And they continue outlining Burke's history of disturbing behavior and how he could even become violent by sharing an incident when Burke hit JonBenet in the face with a golf club, resulting in a scar. But I couldn't personally find pictures of this, so I don't know this for sure.
Did you hit your sister with a golf club?
Not on purpose. She was standing behind me and I pointed like that.
And because of these details, headlines would state that Burke had done it as if it were a matter of fact. Even in the documentary itself, it was stated pretty plainly that Burke murdered JonBenet. And Dr. Werner Spitz, a forensic pathologist, was quoted saying, "It's the boy who did it. Whether he was jealous or mentally unfit or something, I don't know the why. I'm not a psychiatrist, but what I am sure about is what I know about him." That's a crazy statement to make with no evidence. But because of this documentary and the statements that Burke had killed JonBenet, Burke sued CBS, Dr. Werner Spitzer, and other experts for defamation. And CBS was sued for $750 million, and Spitzer was sued for $150 million. And the lawsuit was settled out of court, with the settlement details never being disclosed. But I'm guessing he got a pretty fat payout, because those are some pretty fat allegations to make against somebody that is currently innocent. But supposed evidence that Burke was the killer extended beyond just the feces spreading and the golf club hit. When investigators, both real and fake, aka internet sleuths — I don't consider myself an internet sleuth, okay? They examined interviews of Burke following the death of JonBenet, more questions were raised about Burke after they all analyzed these. And in those clips of Burke from when he was just 9 years old, talking about his sister's death and interacting with investigators who were questioning him, he talks and behaves in ways people have called unnatural for someone who lost a sibling.
You took a knife out? No, something like that.
I think that's how she died.
Or maybe a hammer and a head, maybe.
And Burke being the killer is one proposed reason for this, while another answer could be that this is just one of an infinite number of ways that children react to trauma, and it's not indicative of him being responsible necessarily. And this sentiment was echoed by Dr. Phil, who interviewed Burke in 2016 in what was Burke's first interview since his sister's death 20 years prior. And in that interview, Burke seems pretty lighthearted about JonBenet's death, even smirking and smiling while talking to her, and that led to more claims that he was responsible, though Dr. Phil explains that it was nerves and anxiety due to being Burke's first time talking about the night publicly. And I've watched the whole interview. I also watched several behavioral analysts, like experts in the field, analyze that specific interview, and There was a lot of really interesting notes, one of them noting that they have a strong feeling that he could be autistic. It's just a claim, that is not something I'm saying, it's just something that other experts had opinions on. And his smiling and his mannerisms could just be a result of him being on the spectrum, but that is not concrete, so we don't actually know that for sure. And then other people say that he's deflecting questions and that he's looking away when he's answering things. It's a very interesting interview to watch, and I don't know, you can make your own theories from watching it. Obviously, again, innocent until proven guilty, but yeah, it's just interesting, and I think that's all I can say.
Did you and she eat pineapple together at any time during the day?
Maybe. Like, I don't remember specifically eating pineapple, but very well could have. Like, would you remember eating pineapple 20 years ago? Like, you know.
But the theory that Burke was responsible also suggests that since Burke killed JonBenet, allegedly, the parents, John and Patsy, would have had to cover it up for him. And people reference an extended and enhanced version of the 911 call placed by Patsy as evidence that this was the case. And it's speculated that Patsy had believed she'd hung up the phone but didn't. And some believe the voices at the end to be Patsy, John, and Burke. But notably, if the voice speculated to belong to Burke is him, then it would mean that John and Patsy had lied to investigators when they said that Burke had slept until the cops arrived. And if they lied about one thing, then why not all of it? And that is, once again, all speculative, and no charges were ever brought against anyone for the murder of JonBenet. And Burke has denied his involvement in his sister's death, as has his parents, both then and now. And no matter what anyone says, body language and behavioral experts on YouTube continue evaluating interviews to find the truth. And people were only critical of the Ramsey family for an alleged involvement in JonBenet's murder, but it also began to circulate that they had profited off her death as well. From the moment JonBenet's body was discovered, the media zeroed in on the Ramseys, making them central characters in an unfolding real-life drama. And instead of retreating from the spotlight to grieve privately, John and Patsy leaned into the media frenzy. They gave really high-profile interviews, often controlling the narrative by choosing sympathetic outlets. And in 2000, they even wrote a book, The Death of Innocence. And critics argue this wasn't a grieving family seeking answers, but a PR campaign disguised as mourning. And the book deal alone likely earned the family a substantial financial compensation. So was this a strategy to keep their story and version of the truth in the public eye for profit? Some conspiracy theorists claim that the Ramseys leveraged the nation's obsession with the case to keep their brand intact despite growing suspicions of their involvement. And following the release of their book, there was also a string of defamation lawsuits the Ramseys filed against tabloids, journalists, and even law enforcement officials who implied that they were guilty, which I want to put on the record, I am not implying, just putting the facts out there that other people said. And while the Ramseys claimed that these were about clearing their names, skeptics point out these lawsuits coincided with dwindling public sympathy for the family. So kind of like perfectly timed lawsuits. And JonBenet's parents' behavior surrounding her death has been extremely strange since day one. And it is not really a surprise that people believed that they were profiting from their daughter's death, whether they did anything or they didn't. Their defensive nature and eagerness to sue and to go on interviews do show that they were aware of the amount of attention they were getting and saw the opportunity to become famous. And to this day, her dad and Burke still do interviews carrying on JonBenet's legacy. And there are many media publications and documentaries made about this case. A very recent one, it just came out in November 2024, called Cold Case: Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey? And that's part of the reason why I'm doing this deep dive, because I've heard about this case ever since I was little. I was born the same year that JonBenet was killed. So I know my mom, my parents, everyone around me has always been interested in this case. And I have heard about it a lot, but I kind of wanted to deep dive into it myself and get to know more of it and watch this specific documentary and see if there was anything new. But I'll just kind of give you the breezed over version of what the new documentary came out with. First of all, experts considered the ransom note fake. It was one of the primary pieces of evidence dating back to the beginning of the case, but this is something that we already discussed, so again, it's just not new information. And then that there was a suitcase below the basement window. And there was also a small piece of glass found on the ground, found by the suitcase. And Smith apparently even attempted this himself to see if it would have been difficult, but he found that lifting the grate to get in as well as using the suitcase as a step out would have been easy for the killer. But the police at the time didn't pay much attention to this evidence, but Lou Smith later proved that the window could have easily been accessed and entered in through the house. But then I go back to the fact that there was like cobwebs and dust on the windowsill that were untouched, so again, not really new evidence. And also, the autopsy revealed that she had been hit on the head, which we already went over. And the Boulder police did not initially check the room where her body was found in their initial search, which is really bad, just more neglect from the police. And in the documentary, it kind of leans towards the Ramseys just being completely innocent and kind of leans toward the narrative that they just feel bad for the parents. And it also goes on to say that the DNA analysis proved that the Ramseys were not the killer, but then later it's shown that the DNA evidence was tampered with, so they can't say that definitively either. And Detective Steve Thomas admitted that the FBI and police fed information to the media. Steve Thomas, who later wrote a book about how he believed that Patsy Ramsey to be the killer, admitted that the police attempted to force the Ramseys to speak to them by feeding information to the media. And Thomas said he believed Patsy had gotten angry at JonBenet because she wet the bed and injured her in a fit of rage. And she then set the crime scene up to make it look like a kidnapping gone wrong. And in the docuseries, JonBenet stated that his wife had just survived ovarian cancer and was happy to be alive, so she would not have been angered by something like wetting the bed. And despite Detective Thomas' repeated assertions that Patsy was the killer and the newspaper printing information to point in that direction, the evidence has never been able to prove that the Ramseys were involved. There was also allegedly marks on JonBenet's face and back thought to be left by a stun gun, but there's no conclusive evidence one way or another about this. And there was also a similar assault case in a nearby neighborhood several months later, but the police denied that the two cases were similar in any way. And in 2013, it was revealed that the jury voted to indict both parents, but the DA office did not pursue it. And also, the police investigated several other male suspects, but all had like airtight alibis. And an unknown man named Daxus confessed to the crime. And this was after several years. He called in and basically detailed of how he killed her. And the man ended up being John Mark Carr, who was an elementary school teacher living in Thailand, and he had a history of acting strangely towards children, though he was never formally convicted. And while his phone calls with Tracy outlined how the murder had occurred, Carr ultimately went free because his DNA did not match any DNA found at the scene. And experts also questioned DNA at the scene, like we already talked about as well, because it had been tampered with. And in 2022, the Ramsey family petitioned to have the case re-examined. But I mean, you know, if you've seen any other JonBenet docu-series or documentaries, I mean, I think it's an interesting watch. It maybe goes over details that weren't really said in other documentaries, but the narrative is kind of pushed towards a more positive narrative towards the parents, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, that's all I have for the JonBenet case. I truly do hope that one day this gets solved, because it is just heartbreaking and so strange. And I hope the person that did do it is either burning in hell or it's burning a hole in their conscience and eating them alive, I guess. But that is it for this video. Please let me know what other deep dives you want me to deep dive into down below in the comments. And let me know your theories down in the comments below. I love reading the comments. I answer them. I like them. Even the ones I don't like, I'm reading. So I love having conversations down in the comments below. And also, I have this on Spotify. I have a crime, conspiracy, cults, and serial killers Spotify podcast. You could listen to this and watch it on Spotify as well. Really helps out if you want to go listen to that. Rate it, you know, maybe give it 5 stars if you want. I don't know. But I was #1 in the UK for true crime podcast for a minute there, which was really cool, and top 20 in the States. I think top 5 in true crime. Anyway, crazy. So I just want to say thank you so much to whoever's listening to me on Spotify. Really, really appreciate that. It's super awesome. And yeah, I will see your beautiful face in the next video.